The summer of 1887 in Charleston was meant to be a season of celebration of laughter, echoing through the cobblestone streets of carriages rolling past sunlit verandas and the scent of magnolias mingling with the warm evening air. Yet for one particular household, the Pritchard family this season would become forever marked by unease, whispers, and the kind of darkness that settles quietly over a town before anyone notices. It began with an announcement that seemed ordinary on paper: a wedding. Invitations sent, tables arranged, the bride's gown selected with meticulous care. But beneath the lace and satin, something unsettled the household, something intangible and heavy, like a shadow that refused to lift. No one knew, not the neighbors peering from their windows, not the guests who arrived in their Sunday best, and perhaps not even the Pritchards themselves, that the night would unravel into a tale of disappearance, deception, and secrets that would echo for decades. The streets of Charleston had long carried their own memories of port towns of trade, of whispers passed from servant to servant, but on the night of the wedding, those whispers became uneasy murmurs that lingered in doorways and hallways, speaking of eyes that watched too long, of shadows that moved when no one was looking. The bride, a young woman of delicate build and radiant smile, wore the elaborate gown her mother had painstakingly crafted, adorned with fresh flowers and a veil that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. She was poised, her hands folded neatly in front of her, yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, as if she had glimpsed something the others had not. A premonition, perhaps, or the echo of a warning whispered days earlier, tucked inside a folded letter whose contents have never been revealed. Beside her, the groom's family looked on with pride. The men stiff in their formal suits, the women whispering behind fans and lace gloves, unaware that the ceremony itself might be the stage for something extraordinary, something that would later be described in local newspapers as a singular event, singular in the strangeness that befell all who attended. And then there was the third figure, a young boy with hair thick and untamed, standing slightly apart, hands clasped, but eyes wandering, as if he already knew the undercurrents that no one else could perceive. Some accounts, preserved in diaries and court documents, hint at his presence being more than incidental, that he may have seen or even felt things that adults could not acknowledge, things that were there lingering in corners just out of the light. The house itself seemed to hold its breath that evening. Heavy drapes hung in every room, muting the outside world, while shadows pooled in corners, stretching unnaturally, as if they were observing, silently waiting. Candlelight flickered across walls, catching the delicate lace of the bride's gown and the polished shoes of the guests, casting long fingers of darkness that danced, trembled, and recoiled in the presence of unseen forces. Witnesses would later recall strange sounds, a low creak that did not belong to the floorboards, a whisper in a tone not human, and a sudden chill that ran through the hall, despite the summer heat. Newspapers printed only what they dared: missing trinkets, a veil that vanished, a fleeting scream, reported by a neighbor who claimed to have seen something dart past the window. But private journals tell a different story, one layered with fear, superstition, and hints at curses said to accompany weddings in the city. An old Charleston tale of a wedding dress that brought misfortune, of brides who vanished mid-ceremony, of ghosts who attended feasts without invitation. And so the night unfolded, each moment stretching long, punctuated by laughter that seemed forced by conversations that stopped abruptly when someone noticed a shadow moving. Each guest felt it, the weight of unspoken truths, the brush of something unseen along their skin, the sense that this was no ordinary celebration, but a gathering touched by forces beyond comprehension. By the time the ceremony concluded, by the time the last carriage had rolled down the cobbled streets, the first threads of unease had already woven themselves into the memory of the house, into the very fabric of Charleston itself. It was a night that would haunt diaries, newspapers, and folklore alike. A night where fact and legend became inseparable. A night where the ordinary veil of society was pierced to reveal the extraordinary, the mysterious, the unsettling. And so begins the story of the Pritchard wedding, an event chronicled in sepia photographs, in faded letters, and in oral accounts passed down through generations, each retelling, adding a layer of suspense, a layer of fear, a layer of intrigue. It is here, in this combination of fact and folklore, that the line blurs and the story gains its enduring power. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the Pritchard house thickened with an invisible tension. Guests moved about cautiously, laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged hall, yet always with a pause, as if each sound was measured against some unseen standard. The bride's veil, a cascade of lace and silk, caught the light intermittently fluttering, for reasons no breeze could explain, and whispers began to circulate soft and urgent about items inexplicably shifting. On tables, chairs moved slightly from their original positions, and candles extinguished moments after being lit. One guest, an elderly clerk from the Port District, swore he saw a shadow separate from any human form gliding along the edge of the hall. He claimed it paused briefly, then disappeared behind a tapestry, leaving a cold chill that lingered for hours. In another corner, a maid tending to the refreshments noted the faintest echo of footsteps, though the floorboards were empty beneath her gaze. Diaries recovered decades later reveal the anxiety of those in attendance. One entry reads, "The air itself seems to watch us. My hand shakes as I lay down this note. Something is not right, though I know not what." Another journal mentions a fleeting face in the mirror, pale and expressionless, vanishing when approached. The accounts in contemporary newspapers were far more restrained, a careful selection of words meant to soothe rather than alarm. An unusual occurrence, one article noted, at the Pritchard wedding. Some guests report disturbances, though no harm has come to any party. Yet the subtext, if read between lines and compared with letters sent privately to family elsewhere, reveals a different story, a story of fear, unease, and subtle menace that shadowed the entire event. Folklore grew quickly around the wedding. Locals whispered of an old Charleston legend that brides on certain nights under specific alignments of candlelight and moon could unknowingly invite spirits of the past into their homes. It was said these spirits were drawn to opulence, to laughter, to gatherings celebrating love and unity, only to disrupt, to observe, and sometimes to claim. Children recounted seeing figures through windows, silhouettes with impossible proportions, standing silently in the garden beyond the lantern-lit paths. Some claimed these shapes mimicked the movements of the living guests, bending and twisting, unnaturally disappearing when approached, leaving the observer to question the reliability of their own eyes. Letters discovered years later hint at family disagreements, cryptic warnings sent to the bride and groom separately. One reads, "Do not let the night's festivities blind you to what lingers unseen. Remember the stories of weddings past." The message ends abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted or feared the letter would be intercepted. By midnight, the atmosphere had reached a crescendo. Conversations halted, mid-sentence silverware rattled without touch, and the air seemed to vibrate with anticipation or perhaps warning. A sudden gust from nowhere caused the windows to shiver, and the guests reported a collective shiver running down their spines. It was in this charged moment that the first undeniable incident occurred, the disappearance of the bride's veil, reported by two separate witnesses simultaneously. Despite searching the entire house and the immediate grounds, the item was never found. Some guests fled quietly, their nerves frayed, while others remained unable to tear their gaze from the scenes unfolding. Years later, historians piecing together the events noted contradictions. In witness statements, each account corroborated some facts, yet differed in critical details. Who saw the shadow first? Was it moving toward the bride or merely behind her? Did the mysterious chill precede the disappearance or follow it? These questions remain unanswered, leaving the story suspended between fact and conjecture, reality and legend. The Pritchard wedding thus became a nexus for both recorded and whispered history, a site where archival documents and folklore intertwine, newspapers, diaries, letters, and oral accounts, all contributing to a narrative that defies resolution. And so, the night of July 14, 1887, stands as a moment frozen in time, a collision of celebration and unease, of human ritual and inexplicable phenomena, setting the stage for subsequent events that would cement the wedding's place in Charleston's most enduring mysteries. By the late hours of that fateful night, the tension within the Pritchard household had grown almost tangible. Guests whispered behind lace fans, exchanging glances that flickered between curiosity and fear. The chandeliers swayed gently, though no breeze entered the room, casting quivering shadows across the polished wooden floors. And then it happened, a scream sharp and fleeting, cutting through the soft music, halting conversation, mid-word freezing hearts in a moment of collective dread. Some claim it came from the bride herself. Others say it emanated from the direction of the garden, where moonlight barely touched the gravel paths. No one could be certain. When the maid rushed to investigate, she found nothing, only the soft flutter of the bride's gown trailing in the hallway, empty rooms, and a veil now inexplicably missing from its resting place. Panic began to ripple quietly among the guests. Whispers of kidnapping, of foul play, and of unseen forces circulated in hushed tones, while the elderly clerk, still pale from earlier sightings, muttered that what they had just experienced was not of this world. The young boy with afro hair was seen near the windows, peering outside as if searching for someone, his small hands pressed against the glass. His diary entries, found decades later, described shapes moving beyond the garden wall, tall, elongated figures that watched silently, vanishing when he called to them. "I cannot tell if they are alive or not," he wrote. "I fear they are waiting, and I cannot leave." The groom, attempting to maintain composure, confronted the guests, who whispered too loudly, insisting that there was a rational explanation, that superstition and imagination had taken hold. Yet even he could not deny the chill that ran through the room, the inexplicable tremor in the candle flames, the fleeting shadows that seemed to shift independently. Outside, the night pressed closer, Charleston streets silent, except for the occasional clip of horse hooves, the faint rustle of leaves, and the whisper of secrets carried by the wind. Meanwhile, private letters sent by distant relatives began to surface years later, hinting at prior knowledge, warnings about weddings in this house, about family curses, about spirits drawn to celebrations of love and union. One letter reads, "Do not let joy blind you, for those who came before linger still," and ends with a cryptic mark resembling a crescent moon. The convergence of fact and folklore became impossible to separate. Witness accounts, diaries, letters, and local legend, all weaving a tapestry of dread. Some guests recounted the sudden disappearance of silverware and small trinkets items reappearing in rooms already searched, while others spoke of the sensation of being touched lightly on the shoulder with no one behind them. Perhaps most haunting was the bride herself. Later recollections describe her expression as serene yet distant, her eyes staring beyond the visible, lips moving, as if speaking to someone unseen. At one point, she was reportedly missing from the dining hall, found only hours later standing silently in the library, the veil still nowhere to be found. The officiant's journal, discovered decades afterward, revealed that key passages had been deliberately redacted. Mentions of whispered names, a strange symbol drawn near the altar, and a note of a sudden draft that extinguished candles in a perfect arc, all obscured, leaving future historians and researchers to speculate endlessly. Guests who dared remain until dawn described a growing sense of being watched, not by neighbors or family, but by something else lingering at the edge of perception. Figures that appeared and disappeared, eyes glinting in the darkness, subtle movements in the shadows, enough to unsettle even the most skeptical observers. This night, intended for celebration, became a crucible of fear, legend, and mystery. By morning, the Pritchard wedding had left its mark on all who attended, a memory, layered with both tangible events and inexplicable occurrences, a narrative that would feed local folklore for generations. And so, the singular evening of July 14th, 1887, stands immortalized, a collision of joy and dread, of human ritual and supernatural ambiguity, where fact and legend entwined, creating a story that continues to haunt Charleston streets, archives, and whispered conversations. Morning came over Charleston, yet the town awoke to a weight that could not be shaken. The sun rose over cobblestones and wrought iron fences, casting long, distorted shadows across the streets, shadows that seemed to stretch farther than the buildings themselves, as if the events of the night had seeped into the very fabric of the city. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, gathering on porches and in narrow alleys, recounting fragments of the previous evening, rumors of vanishing objects, glimpses of figures slipping between rooms, whispers carried on the warm breeze that seemed to linger with sinister intent. The Pritchard household, once a place of meticulous order and celebration, now bore the marks of chaos. Curtains swayed as if stirred by invisible hands, floors creaked under no discernible weight, and the lingering scent of candles mixed with an almost imperceptible metallic tang that no one could identify. Investigations began quietly, with letters dispatched to local authorities and informal inquiries made among the guests. Police reports, though cautious and restrained in language, documented several anomalies: missing personal items, contradictory witness statements, and the unaccountable disappearance of a valuable family heirloom, the bride's veil that had vanished entirely without trace. Diaries and private correspondence reveal mounting unease. One guest wrote, "I cannot reconcile what I saw with reason. The house itself seemed to breathe to watch, and yet I am no fool." Another noted, "The shadows do not move as they should. Something else observes, and it is patient." The community's response was a mixture of fear, fascination, and skepticism. Clergy, merchants, and officials debated whether superstition had exaggerated minor incidents, or whether the Pritchard wedding had indeed become the epicenter of something far beyond ordinary comprehension. Stories spread quickly, growing in both detail and horror. One tale spoke of a figure glimpsed near the garden gate, cloaked in darkness, whose eyes glowed with a light that seemed unnatural. Some claimed the same figure had appeared during another wedding decades prior, suggesting a recurring presence, a dark motif tied to Charleston's opulent yet shadowed homes. Meanwhile, tensions among the guests intensified. Conflicting accounts created suspicion: who could be trusted, and who had perhaps orchestrated subtle manipulations during the evening. Letters discovered years later hint at jealousy, familial disputes, and cryptic warnings, all pointing to human motives intertwined with the inexplicable. Local newspapers printed only sanitized versions, focusing on minor disturbances and guest misunderstandings. Yet under the surface, the city buzzed with whispered tales of curses of spirits attending weddings, and of a night where joy and dread collided so completely that neither could ever be separated. Folklore cemented itself alongside fact. The missing veil became an emblem of misfortune. Townsfolk claimed that anyone who came into contact with remnants of the Pritchard celebration, a ribbon, a flower, even a shadow cast by the house, would experience ill luck, fleeting glimpses of specters, or a chill that could not be explained. Scholars who later examined the event noted the convergence of documentation and myth diaries, letters, and news reports, all aligned in broad strokes, yet each retained gaps, contradictions, and oddities, the perfect soil for legend to grow. Children in the street spoke of seeing the bride wandering the grounds after nightfall, silent, her gown trailing unnaturally, her eyes distant, always looking beyond the tangible, as though she had been touched by forces that could not be named. And so, the ripple of that singular night extended outward from the Pritchard household to Charleston's alleys, courts, and parlors, creating a story that became both historical record and whispered lore. The lines between reality and superstition blurred as families recounted tales to their children. Neighbors spoke in hushed voices over fences, and visitors passing through the city felt the weight of unseen eyes always present, always observing. This morning after the wedding, the city itself seemed to hold its breath, a town forever altered by a night that began with celebration and ended with unease, a night where the ordinary veil of festivity had been pierced to reveal mysteries that would linger in Charleston for generations. In the days following the wedding, Charleston's authorities began their official inquiries, though even their procedures could not fully pierce the veil of confusion that hung over the Pritchard household. Officers meticulously recorded statements from each guest, noting every discrepancy, every hesitation, and every instance where memory seemed to falter. Some witnesses described seeing the bride in one location, while others swore she had been elsewhere, a temporal inconsistency that would baffle investigators for decades. The official reports, drafted in careful, stilted language, speak of unexplained disturbances and singular occurrences without providing concrete conclusions. Yet, beneath the formality, a pattern emerges, subtle but undeniable, that suggests something beyond ordinary human intervention. Private diaries discovered long after the fact offer glimpses into the psyche of those present. One entry reads, "I cannot trust what I see. The shadows speak when no one else listens, and I feel the weight of eyes that are not human." Another notes, "The veil vanished from my sight. I looked upon the floor moments later, and it was gone. No door opened, no hand reached for it." These accounts, when cross-referenced with letters sent to relatives in other cities, paint a tapestry of unease, of anticipation, of hidden warnings that were ignored or misunderstood, clues left deliberately or by accident impossible to discern. Investigators grew increasingly frustrated. Witnesses contradicted each other on the most fundamental points: who last saw the veil, who entered the library at midnight, which windows were open or closed. Some guests insisted that subtle manipulations had occurred. Items shifted deliberately, footsteps echoed where no person stood, voices carried words no one recognized. And yet, despite thorough searches, no concrete evidence of theft or foul play could be found. The veil remained missing, and with it the certainty that the night was governed by ordinary logic. Alongside these facts, folklore continued to intertwine. Servants and locals recalled tales of weddings cursed by lingering spirits, of brides whose garments became vessels for unseen entities. Some claimed that the Pritchard family itself had been warned generations prior of misfortune tied to opulent ceremonies. The convergence of historical record and superstition created a narrative that was impossible to untangle a mystery, both documented and mythologized simultaneously. During the investigation, certain letters came to light, redacted in ways that suggested deliberate concealment. One note found hidden in a desk drawer spoke of a figure watching from the gallery. The writer cautioned that revealing this would invite ridicule or disbelief, leaving the secret buried beneath polite society's expectation. Eyewitness testimonies grew more bizarre when recounted years later. A distant cousin claimed to have seen the bride gliding across the drawing room, her feet not touching the floor, while another reported hearing the faint strains of a piano playing from an empty room, notes that stopped abruptly as he approached. Investigators were faced with an impossible task, separating fact from embellishment reality from the creeping influence of fear. Each account, while credible in its own context, contradicted the others, leaving no definitive timeline, no clear cause, and no satisfying resolution. And yet some details could not be ignored. The officiant's journal, partially redacted, contained peculiar notations, a description of a sudden draft, a missing page marked only with a symbol resembling a crescent, and a notation that an object moved of its own accord. Though incomplete, these fragments suggested the presence of forces that defied contemporary understanding. The city itself seemed to respond to these events. Streets were quieter, shadows lingered longer, and those who had attended the wedding reported a persistent sensation of being observed even weeks later. Shops, homes, and markets became subtly infused with the collective memory of unease, a city touched by a single night that had expanded into legend. In this way, fact and folklore became inseparable. Investigators relied on documentation, historians later pieced together timelines, storytellers added narrative flair, yet all were drawn to the same enigmatic truth. The Pritchard wedding had produced anomalies that could neither be fully explained nor wholly dismissed. And so the mystery deepened. Each layer of evidence, each ghostly tale, each contradictory statement contributed to a growing sense that the events of Charleston 1887 were governed not by simple cause and effect, but by forces unseen, by shadows that lingered, and by a night that refused to be forgotten. Weeks turned into months, yet the shadow of that singular wedding lingered over Charleston, as if the city itself had been marked. Families who had attended the event whispered among themselves, recounting details that grew stranger with each telling, details that seemed to shift depending on the storyteller's mood, the time of day, or the phase of the moon. The missing veil remained a symbol, a tangible absence that haunted drawers, closets, and the memories of those who had glimpsed it. Folklore began to solidify around the wedding, blending with fact in ways that made it impossible to separate the two. Children were warned not to venture near the Pritchard estate at night, lest they encounter figures who linger in the corners of the eyes, phantoms drawn to celebrations of joy, yet bent on observing sorrow. Street vendors whispered that they had glimpsed the bride walking silently among the market stalls at dawn, her gown drifting behind her eyes, distant and unseeing, only to vanish when approached. Letters exchanged among relatives contained cryptic notes. "Do not speak of what you have seen," one read. "The house watches, and those who notice too much may not be free from its gaze." These missives, scattered across Charleston and beyond, suggested that some feared the events were not merely anomalous, but cursed a legacy extending beyond the immediate night. Newspapers, constrained by propriety, attempted to frame the story as a series of misunderstandings, yet even the most cautious reporting could not erase the undercurrent of dread. Articles spoke of peculiar occurrences and singular experiences, phrases carefully chosen to hint at something extraordinary while avoiding alarm. Meanwhile, historians and researchers who examined the Pritchard wedding decades later noted recurring motifs: the unexplained disappearance of objects, witnesses experiencing sudden chills or cold drafts, and the persistent sensation of being watched. Each generation added new layers of interpretation, drawing on the existing archival material, oral history, and local superstition. One particularly chilling account, recorded in a diary recovered in the early 20th century, describes a guest waking in the dead of night to find the bride's floral headpiece placed upon the pillow beside them, though no one else had entered the room. Another entry speaks of footsteps pacing in the hallway when all doors were locked, of faint voices, whispering names that belonged to no living person. The story spread, gradually becoming part of Charleston's collective consciousness. Weddings in the city were thereafter accompanied by quiet murmurs, cautious glances at shadows, and the ever-present fear that the Pritchard curse or some other mysterious force might return to claim new victims. Some local clergy attempted to rationalize the accounts as superstition, as mass hysteria, as the result of too many candles and too little sleep. Yet the repeated nature of these reports, the consistency in their eeriness, and the corroborating fragments of diaries and letters made skepticism difficult to maintain. The line between historical record and folklore blurred, creating a narrative both compelling and haunting. Over the years, tourists, journalists, and curious locals visited the site, often reporting sensations of unease, fleeting shadows, or the inexplicable feeling that the rooms themselves were aware of their presence. Objects were sometimes found, moved from where they had been left. Small items vanished only to reappear elsewhere, always accompanied by that same subtle sense of being observed. And through it all, the Pritchard family's name became synonymous with mystery, a cautionary emblem, a story repeated at parlor gatherings, whispered to children, and recorded in journals that themselves grew faded and fragile with age. In this way, the consequences of that night reached far beyond the immediate participants. The singular wedding had seeded a cultural memory, an intricate blend of documented fact and rumor, of history and myth that would persist in Charleston streets' archives and collective imagination for generations to come. Even today, long after the Pritchard house fell silent and long after the veil was never recovered, the story persists, a reminder that certain nights leave traces that cannot be erased, that certain events create echoes, and that sometimes celebration and terror coexist so closely that neither can be separated. The legacy of the Charleston wedding of 1887 endures not only in letters, newspapers, and diaries, but in the hushed voice of storytellers, the wary glance of neighbors, and the lingering shadow of a night when joy and dread collided, leaving behind mysteries that defy explanation, evidence that both exists and eludes, and a story that continues to whisper through the city's history. Decades have passed since the fateful night of July 14, 1887, yet Charleston continues to carry the echoes of the Pritchard wedding. The house itself, though long since altered and rebuilt, retains whispers of its former shadow, murmurs of a past where joy and dread collided so completely that neither could ever be forgotten. Local historians poring over diaries, letters, and newspaper archives have attempted to piece together a coherent timeline, but each effort seems to reinforce the mystery rather than resolve it. Contradictions abound, and the more one digs, the more questions arise. Who truly witnessed the veil vanish, and why was it never recovered? Did the bride herself leave voluntarily, or was she guided by forces unseen? Were the shadows that guests described real, or a manifestation of collective fear? These questions linger unresolved, suspended between the facts that can be documented and the legends that have grown around them. Oral traditions continue to thrive. Families recount the story in hushed tones during gatherings. Children are warned about the lingering spirits of the wedding night, and visitors passing by the old Pritchard property sometimes claim a chill that is not accounted for by the summer breeze. Scholars have noted patterns that link the Pritchard wedding to other unexplained incidents in Charleston and surrounding towns, disappearances, odd phenomena at formal events, objects vanishing or moving inexplicably, as if a subtle, unseen motif threads through the city's history, connecting moments of celebration with moments of fear. The veil, a small yet potent symbol of the evening's mystery, continues to fascinate and unsettle. It represents both absence and presence, the tangible proof of something lost, and the intangible sense of something that continues to watch, waiting, observing. Photographs, faded and yellowed with time, capture faces of guests whose expressions seem to hint at knowledge were beyond the ordinary eyes that meet the camera, with an intensity that suggests they had glimpsed something no one else could see. And so the story persists, bridging the gap between the 19th century and the present. Each retelling adds nuance, each interpretation layers on meaning, yet the core mystery remains untouched, a reminder that some events, no matter how closely examined, cannot be fully explained. The Pritchard wedding stands as both historical record and legend, a nexus where fact and folklore intertwine, where joy and terror existed side by side, and where the consequences of a single night continue to ripple through time. Even now, when the streets are quiet and the summer air hangs heavy with humidity, some claim they can feel it, the sense of eyes lingering, of a presence just beyond perception, of a story that refuses to fade. Perhaps that is the enduring power of the event, a reminder that history is not only what is recorded in ink, but also what lingers in memory, in shadow, in the spaces between certainty and imagination. And so the Pritchard wedding remains a tale without resolution, a night forever suspended between light and darkness, joy and dread. You have just witnessed a glimpse into Charleston's enduring enigma, a story where every answer raises new questions, where every shadow hints at something unseen. What truly happened on that night? Was it merely the result of human folly, or something far darker lingering still? The truth remains elusive, waiting for those daring enough to look closer to question and to see what others refuse to acknowledge. The aftermath of the Pritchard wedding extended far beyond the walls of the estate, weaving into the very fabric of Charleston's collective memory. Years passed, and the story carried in diaries, letters, and whispered tales became inseparable from the city itself. Scholars who revisited the case decades later noted that even the most mundane details, a misplaced chair, a shadow in the corner, the flicker of candlelight had been imbued with a sense of foreboding, as if the night's events had left a subtle imprint on the town's consciousness. Families who had attended continued to recount the night's mysteries to children, passing down warnings, cloaked in allegory, to respect what cannot be seen, to heed the lessons of observation and caution, to recognize that some events transcend the ordinary. The motif of the vanished veil became emblematic, a symbol of unresolved tension between appearance and reality, between celebration and fear. Tales of fleeting figures, of whispered warnings, and of shadows that observed without being seen persisted across generations, evolving with each retelling, yet remaining tethered to the original events. Visitors to the Pritchard estate in the modern day report inexplicable sensations, a chill in a warm room, fleeting shadows at the periphery of vision, or the faint sound of footsteps where none should exist. Some claim that on nights when the moon hangs low over Charleston, the echoes of that wedding can still be felt, as if the city itself remembers, as if the very stones and timber carry the resonance of that singular night. Researchers note that similar incidents occurred in surrounding towns, weddings disrupted by unexplained phenomena, objects moving of their own accord, witnesses reporting sensations of being observed, suggesting a recurring motif, a shadowed thread woven into the fabric of local history. The Pritchard wedding, thus, stands as both historical record and enduring legend, a convergence of fact, folklore, superstition, and human curiosity. And yet, even with all that has been documented, analyzed, and retold, the mystery remains unresolved. The veil never recovered the shadows, never fully explained the whispers, never silenced. To this day, the question hangs in the air, intangible yet palpable: what truly occurred in the rooms of the Pritchard estate on that July night? Was it human mischief, an orchestrated act of deception, or something far beyond understanding, a force that transcends logic and lingers still in the corners of perception? You have just witnessed one chapter in Charleston's enduring enigma, a story that refuses closure, a night frozen between memory and legend, joy and dread, fact and folklore. And as you leave this account, consider this: some stories are not meant to be solved, some shadows are not meant to be chased, and some mysteries endure precisely because they are eternal. You have just heard a record from the past, yet the echoes remain whispering through time, waiting for those bold enough to listen, to question, and to see what others dare not. What truly happened that night remains a secret between history, memory, and the shadows that watch still. You've just witnessed another chapter of Charleston's enduring mystery, a story where the line between fact and folklore blurs. If you wanted to uncover more untold historical secrets, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next case. Who knows, the ghosts of the past may still be waiting where you least expect them.